Welcome. My name is Nigel Comer and I'm Chief Executive of Heinz Watties in New Zealand. It is my pleasure to introduce you to this video which celebrates 75 years of Heinz Watties' contribution to New Zealand. For me, there are four key themes in this video. The first is celebrating our founder, Sir James Wattie, for his vision, his character and his energy in creating this business. The second is the acquisition of the H.J. Heinz Company of Watties in 1992. The third is the dedication and commitment that the Heinz Watties team has in bringing great tasting, innovative food to Kiwi consumers, and the dedication that they have in adding value to our customers. And the fourth is the passion and the commitment and the enthusiasm of the current team, and also for those that have gone before, in making this such a successful business. 1934 was a milestone year for New Zealand in many ways. It was first the year that New Zealand celebrated Waitangi Day. It was also the year where the Reserve Bank was established. And in relation to the video today, it was the year when our founder, Sir James Wattie, first processed fruit puree into jams in his Hastings factory.
This is the story of Watties. How a chance remark led to one man seeing an opportunity, and how with incredible vision, drive and courage, a great food company was built bearing his name. The man is gone, but the company remains. Watties to this day is still the most trusted and preferred food brand in New Zealand, in large part because Watties has been so closely tied to the fortunes of this country. Hastings, New Zealand, early 1934. The Great Depression was still being felt through the world. In New Zealand, soup kitchens fed families in need.
So times were tough. People were sick, people were tired, people were hungry.
The Hawke's Bay region had only just recovered from the 1931 earthquake that had devastated the area. 15 city blocks had been destroyed in the Hastings CBD. Many local businesses were wiped off the face of the earth. The people of Hastings were now looking to the future to rebuild and emerge from these troubled times. Natural irrigation, ideal soil and high sunshine hours had helped make Hawke's Bay one of the best regions in New Zealand for horticulture. Its produce was famous. But the high cost of transporting the region's fresh fruit to the big cities meant they were too expensive for most to afford. As a result, tons of peaches and plums in the orchards of Hawke's Bay were left to rot. A Hastings grocer had recently become insolvent, and their accountant, Harold Carr, called a meeting of creditors. At the meeting was a salesman from Whittam's in Auckland. He proudly boasted to Harold of his company's plans to manufacture jam using fruit pulp imported from Australia. Harold knew of a man who might be interested in this revelation, and within an hour had contacted him. His name, Jim Wattie. Jim Wattie had left school in Nelson at the age of 13, and his family moved to Hastings.
Despite the fact that he was blind in one eye and had been from birth, he was a very keen rugby player and played in local rugby teams.
And the postmaster told me that as I am blind in my right eye and was born that way, I wouldn't get any further than a letter carrier. And privately he told me that he thought I'd do very much better outside the service. But he said, I'm not trying to influence you, I'm only telling you what I think. Now that was a wonderful thing for this man to do.
At 23, he married Gladys Henderson. Together they bore two sons, Gordon and Ray. Jim was 32 and the secretary manager of the Hawke's Bay Fruit Growers Company when Harold Carr came to see him that fateful day in 1934.
They were angry, actually. It was anger in some part that started it off.
My father used to say that Jim's comment was, this is wicked, Harold, this is wicked. Here is all this wonderful fruit and produce and no way of preserving it, and here we've got people who are really hungry and something should be done.
Jim and Harold travelled to Auckland to ask the jam maker, Whittam's, if they'd be interested in a local supply from Hastings instead of Australia. They agreed. Back in Hastings, Jim approached his employers for help to finance this new pulping operation. The answer was no, but they did offer to rent him buildings and allow him time to work on the new venture.
The prospect of starting a new business, while it was exciting, was very daunting for him. He had this great idea, but where was he going to get the money from? He certainly didn't have it on his wages.
Faced with a lack of finance, the venture looked doomed before it had begun. Down but not out, Jim decided to go door to door on the hunt for investors. One of the first approached was Arthur Georgi, an Italian immigrant and local tailor. Arthur had lost his building and business in the 1931 earthquake. With the help of the local townspeople, he had managed to rebuild the businesses from scratch. He saw in Jim Wattie the chance to repay the kindness shown to them by the people of Hastings. Jim and Harold approached more local businessmen for funds, many of whom had also lost everything in 1931.
Morning, Len.
Jim Wattie.
Morning, Len.
Harold, what can I do for you blokes?
It's more a question of what we can do for you, Len.
Oh, yeah?
We've started a company.
What sort of company?
It's going to be big. Very big. All we need
Canning.
is a little capital.
What are you going to can?
We'll start with fruit.
The original plan was to produce 82 tonnes of fruit pulp for jam production.
It's going to be big, Len. I promise you one day you're going to look back
I'm in,
and you're
Jim.
going to remember.
How much?
25 quid a share.
They offered 50 shares at £25 each.
You won't regret this, Len. We're going to turn the Hawke's Bay into the fruit basket of the nation. Maybe even the world. I'm not kidding you. I thought it all
There
through.
you go. Mr. J. Wattie Canneries Limited.
Having secured finance from 28 local investors, they began production in
I won't
earnest.
let you down, Len.
So it was really their determination to do something not only for themselves but for their community that set them off. And so they had almost an evangelic fervour about the way they went about their work.
They launched into the business guns blazing. It was early days, but things were looking good for the fledgling company. Within 2 months, they'd decided to venture into the canning of fruit pulp.
In the Hawke's Bay, two similar canning operations had already been tried and failed, and the shareholders had lost all their money. So they knew it was a risk. It was a risk for them, it was a risk for the people who they asked to put their faith in.
With everything in place, ready for fruit canning to begin, disaster struck. In February 1936, heavy rain caused brown rot in the peach crop. The harvest was ruined. Then heavy frost wiped out a subsequent peach crop and most of the pears. For Jim Wattie and his new enterprise, things were looking dire.
That was absolutely devastating for them, but they felt a responsibility to the people who had put such trust and money in them and so much faith in them. They felt they had to do something about this.
Jim Wattie picked himself up and did what no one in the country had done before. By taking tomatoes and canning them, he created a brand new product that was a total novelty to New Zealand at the time. The result was a huge success. The company had canned 250 tonnes that season and have been canning tomatoes ever since. Encouraged by this success, in 1936, Watties approached local growers and offered contracts to grow asparagus and peas. Growers in the area had told Jim that peas would never grow in Hawke's Bay. He proved them wrong. By 1939, the volume of pea production was so great it was too much for pickers to handle in the field, and a machine was installed at the factory to strip the peas from the whole plant. Again, Jim Wattie's foresight was to be decisive. The company went from strength to strength, built in great part on the drive of its managing director and its solid and reliable workforce. But war was looming on the horizon in Europe, the future was very uncertain for Jim and his business, now just 5 years old.
Here's the start of a perfect dinner.
The family agrees, Watties please.
He'll reward you. So always serve Watties green beans in solid pack or convenient free flow. There's a size for every family. Give the professional touch to your meals with Watties green beans.
The family agrees, Watties please.
Lads, oh lads, don't do it. I didn't know. I thought they all tasted the same.
I got news for you. People tend to get terribly hung up when you serve anything but Watties baked beans. Twice the taste and twice as good, because Watties means good food.
I make a good omelette.
You know you're the king of a castle. You're just the bee's knees. And anyone who says you ain't special's barking up the wrong trees. And that's why...
Buy new Champ Advanced Formula and you could win a trip for two to Fiji.
Cause you're my champ.
Plus lots of other prizes for you and your champ.
Cause you're my champ.
Details where you buy new Champ Advanced Formula.
Cause you're my champ.
At last, war really comes to New Zealand. Japan strikes without warning. West, east, and south. Now, our own soil is threatened.
The Second World War was now underway. On September 3rd, 1939, the government declared the country at war. But as New Zealand troops mobilised, the shortage of staff became a major problem for Watties. Over 2/3 of New Zealand men aged 18 to 45 had gone to war. Even Jim Wattie himself had been called up to serve. But as they say, an army marches on its stomach. And the build-up in the 1930s meant that Watties was ideally placed to meet the demands of processed food to fuel the war effort. Jim Wattie would be needed at the company. Watties was declared an essential industry in 1942, and as such now came under the power of the government food controller. The government now instructed the company on which products to make, in what quantity, and how much to sell them for. Canned meat for the troops became the priority, and that year over 1.7 million cans were produced in beef and mutton varieties. In 1942, Watties was asked by the New Zealand government to provide dehydrated vegetables and fruit for the sailors, airmen and soldiers at war. The government supplied the building and the machinery, but the lack of workforce remained a major problem. Prior to the war, social expectation was that women would stay home while their husbands worked. The lack of available working men changed all of this, and women began entering the workforce almost immediately. The introduction of machinery also helped ease the labour shortage. Watties had served its country well, supplying preserved food for New Zealand troops miles from home. But the war was now coming to an end. Jim Wattie realised that demand for canned meat and dried vegetables would fade as the guns fell silent and troops returned home. During the 6 years of war, Watties had grown substantially in order to service the war effort. In 1938, the cannery's turnover had been $71,000. Now in 1945, the last year of World War II, production exceeded $1 million. With foresight, Jim Wattie had several new products developed during the 40s that he planned to bring to the market once the war was over. The new products included tomato soup, tomato puree, the exotic spaghetti,
Buona notte. What is this you say?
Baked beans and the iconic tomato sauce.
4 pounds of the juiciest, freshest, sun-ripened tomatoes go into every large bottle or can of Watties tomato sauce.
After the war, the country was looking to rebuild, and Jim Wattie was also looking to the future to grow the company. Jim was hoping these new products would be a success. He knew that if they failed, his company faced a very uncertain future.
Are you green with envy at other people's peas? Watties Good Life baby peas are smaller, sweeter and juicier. The perfect pea. Good Life. Good news from Watties. Perfect.
You can talk out through your nose and say, how you going, mate? You can shout your cuzzy's lunch, but just make sure they bring a plate. You can watch the one-day cricket, you can scream until you're hoarse, but you'll never be a Kiwi till you love our Watties sauce. Well, you can burn a snarl of black right through, slap it on some bread. You can throw the kids a bowl of chips and say that they've been fed, yeah. You can wear your sloppy jandals on some very posh golf course, but you'll never be a Kiwi till you love our Watties sauce. You can do a fearsome haka, and every All Black can with ease. You can bake a cake that lights up the skies and serve it up for tea. Well, if you can sit around and yarn the night away, if the beer will last, of course, but you'll never be a Kiwi till you love our Watties sauce. Yeah.
The 1950s was a time of great optimism. New Zealand had survived the Depression and emerged victorious from the war years.
New Zealand was in a stage of major public works programs. There was a baby boom, there were houses to be built.
Unemployment was at an all-time low.
It was down to around 100 men. It was often joked that the Minister of Labour knew every unemployed person by name.
With full employment and money in their pockets, consumers had a taste of the good life and were interested in things that were new. This was also true of food, and one new product was corn.
Sweet corn was a vegetable that wasn't grown extensively in New Zealand. There was a little bit imported, but it was considered a luxury item.
In 1950, Jim Wattie saw corn as an opportunity to develop a new market. It didn't take long for him to realise he could sell a lot more than his initial trial run. The problem was finding suitable land in Hastings on which to grow corn. It was time for the company to branch out and leave the comfort of their home base. After some searching, Gisborne was chosen as the ideal area for this new crop.
And typically of Jim Wattie, he didn't go in a small way, he went in a big way.
In 1951, he contracted growers, planted an area the size of 700 rugby fields, and bought a disused wool store to use as a factory. He sent his 25-year-old son Gordon to run the operation, and within 6 months they had a fully operational factory. In January 1952, the first corn production came off the line, and Hastings staff were brought by train to celebrate the opening of this new factory.
There was a great deal of excitement when the Gisborne factory opened in the area because a number of growers had been contracted and they'd grown 480 hectares of corn. So there was a sense of excitement with the big Watties factory coming to Gisborne.
The first season, they produced over 4 million cans.
There were a lot of things going on this hunch of Jim Wattie's that it was going to work. He went in boots and all, and he really got stuck into it.
Corn was a winner. Jim had used his trademark drive and initiative to great success. With the support of the team he had brought together and inspired, his punt had paid off. But for Jim, the question on his lips was always, what next? Gisborne at the time was a major fishing port, and in 1955, Watties Gisborne began packing fish, including frozen fillets and fish fingers. The waste left over would be used in the creation of another brand new product. For the first time, commercial pet food became available. The first products were Felix for cats and Fido for dogs. When Sir Edmund Hillary led an expedition to the South Pole in 1958, the dogs that pulled the sleds were fed on Watties Fido pet food. By 1953, Watties had 1,200 staff in Gisborne and Hastings. Exports accounted for 40% of production, and the company was listed on the New Zealand Stock Exchange. On the 7th of January 1954, the Hastings factory was honoured by a visit from Queen Elizabeth II and the Duke of Edinburgh as part of their New Zealand-wide tour. They spent an hour visiting the King Street factory. The visit was seen as a milestone, a royal seal of approval for the huge success that Watties had achieved. By the early 1950s, domestic fridges with small freezer compartments started to become available on the New Zealand market.
It was still fairly uncommon to have fridges. Many people had ice boxes, which were just like large chili bins, and had an iceman deliver a big block of ice, which lasted a week.
Consumers were starting to become interested in frozen food products. As part of this phenomenon, Watties had a contract to pack frozen peas for Birdseye, the US company first in the world to freeze vegetables. Birdseye had provided the equipment with the proviso it was to be used exclusively for the production of Birdseye products. Gordon and Ray Wattie were convinced that the market in New Zealand could be expanded and pushed for their father to buy their own frozen foods plant. He agreed.
As the 50s moved on, people had a number of labour-saving devices in the homes. They were keen to use the new technology, and they had the money to be able to afford it.
Typical of the confidence and the vision of Jim Wattie, the new blast freezers he ordered were so big that overnight Watties became the largest frozen vegetable producers in the world outside of the USA. With export inquiries flooding in, it was obvious they were onto a winner. They quickly doubled capacity and made their first exports to Australia and the UK. They'd promised their various markets the new Free Flow product for the 57-58 season. Unfortunately, the new equipment had not arrived in time, so in order to appear free-frozen, the staff were instructed to take the frozen solid peas and smash them with mallets.
As the technology got better, so we started to see freezers and refrigerators in the local corner stores.
Another company taking advantage of the new developments in refrigeration was Tip Top Ice Cream, and in 1958 they became the sole distributor of Watties products in New Zealand.
A win for Watties because they had a way of getting their frozen products to the stores, and a win for Tip Top because that meant greater volume going on their trucks and to make their trucks more economical.
When in 1957 the government cut the imports of baby food into New Zealand by half, Jim Watties saw another opportunity. He immediately entered the market with apple, prune and meat packs. And these were an overnight success. By 1959, Watties had extended the baby foods range to 9 varieties and had launched a junior foods range of 7 varieties. He asked the well-regarded Plunket Society to approve the products and began a close relationship with Plunket that continues today. New Zealand was now one of the most economically successful countries in the world, with the 3rd highest standard of living. Kiwis had very healthy appetites, with the greatest yearly consumption of calories and protein of any nation in the world. With foresight and innovation, Watties had capitalised on the good times. During its rapid expansion, Watties had achieved many firsts, including the first to use forklift trucks in New Zealand, the first to use helicopters for aerial spraying, and also the first to use pallets for distribution. As the country entered the 60s, new export markets were opening up. Locally, the supermarket was a new phenomenon, changing the retail landscape of the country. New markets meant new products meant new machinery, and a new blast freezer had been installed in the Hastings factory. At Christmas 1961, Jim Wattie was looking forward to the new 1962 season, but the King Street factory was about to be dealt a potentially fatal blow.
King Bartlett pears, Golden Queen peaches, Royal Dessert,
regal breakfast dishes.
It must be Watties.
Then the sergeant says, "Not so fast, Smith." You get it? Hello, I'm Doug Field, and this is a Bartlett pear. It was mine, but it's Watties now, and soon they'll take all the others I've grown. And then, someday, you'll take them home like this. Watties Bartlett pear halves, pear quarters, or even Watties pear slices. You'll serve them up to the family, probably with ice cream, and they'll love it. And that makes my job seem worthwhile. So, thanks.
Watties means good food.
Imagine if everyone had to do everything that most mothers do, like bringing up kids, holding down a job, and cooking up all the meals.
Luckily, there's Watties Good Life casserole mix, chunky homestyle vegetables for hearty stews or casseroles. So you can serve your family good food and still have time for the good life. Watties Good Life, for people who've got a lot on their plate.
On February 19, 1962, a local grower, Ted Hill, was tending his fields near Hastings when an alarming sight caught his eye.
Went out about this time of day and went out and looked out. I came into my wife and said, "Look over there." Big pall of smoke going up.
Fireman Peter Fraser was one of the first called to the scene.
Going down the Heratonga Street, the main street of Hastings, when we turned into Nelson Street and looked up, the pall of smoke coming from Watties was unbelievable. From past experience that I had, I knew that this was a good one. You just knew that it was burning.
The raging inferno had been caused by an electrical fault near the free flow tunnel. Passing workers had observed this initial event.
And they just walked past the actual switchboard when the explosion occurred. And the small flame that occurred caught fire to the polystyrene, which was very inflammable, and just the whole tunnel went. They ran down. As they ran, the flames ran with them.
All hell seemed to break loose. There was people running everywhere, and somebody said the place is on fire. And people were starting to get out. And I always remember Brian Davies. He was a very strict person who was the foreman at the machine shop then, and he said, just keep working, and we kept working.
But the fire soon spread through the main cannery building.
Jean said, "What's that?" And I said, that's Wattie Cannery's on fire, I reckon. And I said, "You know what, that bloody bean machine that I looked at this morning, it'll be bloody well in the middle of it."
About half a dozen office staff on the same floor where the fire was stayed up top and were looking out the windows and waving at everybody. And if the fire had turned, the flames would have gone right through the attic above them.
After the back wall, which held the 6-inch steam line, collapsed, we all thought we better try and help out the best way we could.
They were still fighting the fire when the fire brigade came. But just after that, the wind moved a little bit and the fire moved very rapidly across the other way.
The black smoke was pouring out of it then. Now you can imagine pallets and pallets of canned goods with cardboard cartons. It got us going to the extent that, oh hell, we'll have some fun here.
After entering the building, Peter Fraser soon found himself in the danger zone of the fire.
Where I was in the middle of the fire is in this area here, and this is where the blast freezer was. That looked like a bit of a glow there, but I can assure you that it was fairly warm. The windows burst. There was danger earlier on because we didn't know the stability of the roof. I knew that when the roof went, there was actually no escape for us back down the stairs. It was quite a fire.
The perilous situation was made worse by the factory's highly flammable roof.
Watties building in those days had a tarred roof. All this pitch from the roof was actually coming down to where we were working.
It was just raining hot bitumen.
Thanks to the heroic efforts of the local and district firemen, the surrounding Wattie buildings were saved from further damage. But the fire was a devastating blow. The main factory had been severely damaged. Not only was it a setback to the company, it was also potentially disastrous for the Hawke's Bay region.
The loss is a very heavy one, but it's a reverse, and we have had reverses before. The work of the fire brigadesmen has been wonderful. I appreciate it, and I'm sure that everybody here who has seen those men at work appreciate what they've done today and are still doing. Also, my own staff, the men have risen to great heights, in my opinion. They've helped in every way possible. They've helped the firemen handle the hoses, and it is through teamwork of this kind that the loss is not greater than it really is.
Amazingly, despite the disaster, production from the factory resumed 2 days later, and peas were canned and packed in record numbers.
That first day's pea production was the biggest in the company's history. It was a testament to the high regard that Jim Wattie was held in, that competitors offered to pack product for him. So the two competitors in the pea market offered to pack for him. Even Edgel's in Australia offered to pack under the Wattie label to help them out.
The company had survived the disaster, but now Jim Wattie was at an age when most men retired. His family could see that the stress of the fire, the responsibility he felt towards his loyal workers, and the continual pressure of maintaining the growth of his business was taking a severe toll on his health.
One enormous plate of Wattie spaghetti on toast as ordered.
Oh, Mrs. Bond, you've done it again.
Done what again?
This spaghetti is perfection.
It's not very hard.
No, but it's not too soft either. You're a wonderful cook.
You really do like spaghetti, don't you?
Oh, like it. I love it. It's more fun than playing Gleek.
Playing what?
Gleek.
Oh, how do you play Gleek?
Very badly.
With all the natural goodness of ripe tomatoes, you can pour on all you want. Watties tomato sauce, the great New Zealand red.
Red, 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 it's Watties red. That's why I said red.
The 60s were a time of social change and great prosperity for New Zealand. For Watties, it was a time of huge growth and came to be known as the Decade of Mergers. During the 1960s, 5 farms were purchased around Gisborne, and in August 1969, Jim Wattie purchased the 255-hectare greenfield site in Hornby in Christchurch. Jim Wattie's 30 years of hard work was taking its toll on his health. He had a heart attack in London in 1964 and was advised by his doctors to slow down. However, he proceeded to complete the purchases of Thompson & Hills and Kirkpatrick's, who owned the Oak and K brands respectively. They were purchased in 1964 and their combined turnover was $3.2 million. The doctor's warnings did not slow Jim Wattie down. He followed this up in 1968 with a merger with General Foods, who owned Tip Top, Teagle, Bluebird and RFL Frozen Distribution. Then he merged with Cropper NRM, whose Promoter, Champion, NRM and Betty Crocker brands were all the biggest in their markets. From the merger of these 3 great New Zealand companies, Wattie Industries Limited was born, then the 7th largest public company in New Zealand. Jim Wattie's efforts in creating this iconic New Zealand company were recognised when he received a knighthood in June 1966, and he became known as Sir James Wattie. Sir James Wattie started plans to step down as chairman of Wattie Industries Limited in 1972 on medical advice. His sons, Gordon and Ray Wattie, took over responsibilities for running the company. In retirement, Sir James Wattie had planned to move into the small house next to Mangapapa with Lady Wattie, but sadly he died of a heart attack on the 8th of June in 1974 before this could happen. Right to the end, he had worked for the company he loved, and the week before he died, he was in Australia on company business. Tributes poured in from staff, the people who had worked with him, the Prime Minister Norman Kirk, and from around the country. His funeral was held at St Matthew's Church in Hastings, and a memorial service was also held in Gisborne, attended by over 1,000 people.
As long as I can remember, I always had ambition and a strong desire to do something worthwhile.
Nearly 40 years after his death, people who knew Jim Wattie still remember him fondly.
You wouldn't find a nicer person. He knew everybody by their first name. He used to go through the factory and he'd say, "Hello Sue," or "Hello Joe," whatever your name was, and how are things going, and just took a human interest in everybody.
And that was the type of person he was. He didn't sit up in his office all day and every day. He did get down amongst the workers.
Didn't matter what race, colour, creed you were always his friend.
All the time I was there, we never really had a strike. And I think that was one thing that stopped a strike occurring, was because he went down and talked to the workers.
Both the old man and Ray were very quick to give their support. I think basically because of the relationship between the staff and the Watties themselves, it was a lot to do with the quick progress that had been made in the actual industry.
It wasn't all work and no play for Jim. He had a great passion for horse racing. And in 1962, he entered the Melbourne Cup with a horse named Even Stevens. Factory worker Ian Gordon recalls the race day as a career highlight.
Listening to the Melbourne Cup on the speaker system, it was right around the factory, the day that Even Stevens won the Melbourne Cup.
But Even Stevens too good for them in the run of the post.
And that was Mr. Wattie's horse.
Clearly from Comic Peter.
Every year a Christmas party was held for the children of Wattie's staff.
We would always have a big Christmas party that my grandfather held for factory staff, and that was held at Mangapapa, and Father Christmas came either by fire engine or even helicoptered in a couple of occasions, which was pretty amazing in those days.
For the kids' Christmas party on the back lawn, after we cleaned up all the mess and everything that kids make on the back lawn, tidied it all up, Mr. Wattie used to invite us into his trophy room. And he had a huge pool table in there, and there was all the photographs of his racehorses and the trophies and that he'd won. And he would stand behind the bar, and he had all the top shelf bottles lined up there, and he would ask you what you wanted to drink, and that was it.
On a personal level, a granddaughter remembers a loving grandfather.
A pretty caring, loving guy, very involved with the family. He built our family home in Taupo in Timahanga Bay, which is just before Acacia Bay, after Even Stevens won the Melbourne Cup. Granddad always liked, after dinner, his cheese board, and I always remember whenever we were staying at Mangapapa that he would retire to his lazy boy chair, and Nana would always give him his cheese board with his orange as well. He liked his oranges. They had a wonderful billiard room there, and many a nights were spent playing billiards, and yeah, lots of fun, family fun.
There's only one place that I know of where the word success becomes before work, and that's in the dictionary. Nowhere else. In other words, success can only come from hard work.
The man was gone, but his legacy was to live on.
I always had huge regard for Sir James, and I still do, and I felt a greater responsibility almost to him than to anyone else, because I wanted to make sure that we were good caretakers for something that he'd begun.
The new generation of Wattie's management, trying to keep this huge company going after the death of the company founder, were about to discover that the very existence of the company was about to be threatened, and if they didn't make the right decisions, all would be lost.
These are the tomatoes, sun-ripened and juicy red, that go into the soup that Watties make. This is the man who checks the flavour and the quality of the soup that Watties make. These are the labels that tell you this is the soup that Watties make.
Watties Concentrated Soup, 9 luxury varieties, is ready to serve.
If it's rich in flavour, it must be Watties. Ding. The sauce is cause is Watties. That's all.
This summer, experience an orange soft drink that's out of this world. Frist, the orange experience. New Zealand experienced a period of economic and social growth in the 1960s. But now entering the 70s, everything was changing. Britain, which had long been the main market for New Zealand food, was now looking closer to home for its trade.
When Britain joined the EEC, New Zealand and Australia felt very threatened. New Zealand had always viewed the UK as an unlimited market for its produce, particularly meat and dairy. So Britain joining the EEC really upset that feeling of complacency.
Watties had operated in a monopoly position. They were a monopoly supplier. And that, of course, brings its own responsibilities in the sense that you've got to get the product out because the consumer won't have peaches or won't have tomatoes if you don't produce them.
We're into a period of very high inflation, costs increasing at sort of between 15 and 20% per annum, prices needing to go up, to recover those cost increases, really inflation rampant. And so Muldoon in that time brought in price control and cost control.
I know the New Zealand economy better than any other living soul.
Conversations in government were beginning to say we need more free trade. This country's got to internationally compete.
Under the new Longy government, Finance Minister Roger Douglas had radical plans for the New Zealand economy.
The only way we're going to get out of this situation is to tackle all our problems and have good economic management.
They were starting to see that things were changing for New Zealand.
It is far better that we start adjusting to changes voluntarily than to have it forced upon us.
A closer trade agreement with Australia was one solution proposed to take New Zealand into this new era.
The principle behind closer economic relationships, or CER, was that New Zealand and Australia would treat each other favourably. At the time, there were a number of tariffs that all countries had to prevent other countries coming into your markets, and the tariffs could be 50% up, sometimes 100%. And the idea of CER was that those tariffs between New Zealand and Australia would be removed. The downside of CER for companies like Watties was that meant that Australian companies could and did see New Zealand as a seventh state. So the Australian companies had the advantages of economies of scale working in a much bigger market. That put companies in the New Zealand manufacturing sector at a significant disadvantage.
With the CER agreement in place, Watties immediately felt under threat from the Australian competition.
Ray Wattie, Jim's son, had seen that as a betrayal.
He was deeply angry about that. Thank you very much for building up that New Zealand business that you did in response to New Zealand's needs at that time. We're now going to open it to competition from your biggest competing food producer, Australia. This to Ray Wattie was a real threat.
Now all of a sudden, Watties found themselves in a highly competitive international market, something they hadn't faced before. And there were big threats from Australia. There were big manufacturers in Australia who were threatening their markets.
They must have been considering, the world is going to open up. Here's a small example of it. Are we internationally competitive? Are we organised to win?
The lack of senior marketing experience in the country meant that expertise was sought in the UK. Richard Jeffrey, with an international reputation in the industry, was wooed over to help the company meet these new challenges.
The time Richard Jeffrey came into the business, there was a lot of long-standing, loyal Watties employees working with the company. However, they hadn't been exposed. They'd worked in a protected environment, and they really didn't know what was about to hit them.
It was a product of the Muldoon government's protected society in the sense that it, by and large, looked out to the government and into the producers of product.
What Richard Jeffrey had to do was create an environment where the keen young graduates he was bringing into the company could work alongside the more experienced old Watties heads. The way he brought those two quite diverse types of people together was a real credit to him.
Watties was seen in New Zealand as a local success story, and that had been true, but the world of business was changing rapidly. New recruit Peter Lucas found the image and the reality to be two very different stories.
When I got there, it was a culture shock.
Welcome to Watties. You're joining a great New Zealand company.
Here I came to the icon of New Zealand business, the very icon of the place, and it was not in good shape.
We didn't know what marketing was. It had almost not been done.
Their big issue was to get the product in, get it packed and get it out, and it was very good at it. It wasn't a marketing operation. It didn't look to the consumers. So that was the big issue. It wasn't how you sell them, it was how you make them.
What had served it well in the past was not serving it well. It had become over-centralised, undermanaged. In need of the protection that it had, and that protection was being stripped away.
All the tariffs went, all the competition came from overseas into the market with a rush.
Richard Jeffrey was concerned for the very future of the company.
We were facing very, very fierce competition coming in very, very fast. The big issue, as far as I was concerned, was that we had to change from looking back to the supplier and out to the government. Instead, we had to look out to the customer, i.e. our supermarket customers, and also to the consumer.
Richard looked down at this Wattie Canneries company and he said it's too big.
And the recommendation was made to break it up because the centre was overloaded.
But at J. Wattie Foods, our emphasis is not on being biggest, but on being best.
There was a sort of big bang, if I remember rightly, which was about late 1986, when unfortunately we had to close some operations. Some people were made redundant, which was not a happy situation. There was something of a crisis. If we didn't do these sorts of things, we might not have survived.
Richard was tremendously courageous. He had the courage to break up what was perceived as the most successful food business in New Zealand, an icon for New Zealand business. He had the courage to say, and the foresight to say, we've got to break it into its constituent bits.
The full release of the Wattie capability was enabled by that reorganisation.
Following the restructure, Peter Lucas was put in charge of the strategically important Wattie Frozen. He soon discovered he was faced with a huge challenge.
So what is Wattie Frozen Foods?
There wasn't Wattie Frozen. There was no business. There was only a factory.
Wattie Frozen Foods is you.
A production, spread out production, all mixed up with the other business, so that was one bit of it, and nothing else. There was no accounting, no sales, no marketing, there was nothing, because it had all been mixed in. The business built from basically no management to a fully functioning business. And we slowly built up a good team.
At the same time, 40-year-old David Irving was appointed as the head of J. Wattie Foods Division.
Wattie Foods was essentially founded on the company that Sir James started. It was the canned food business, the sort of traditional business. It had all of the Wattie values in it. I was able to use that in a cultural sense. We adopted our values, we got a sense of our future, we understood our threats.
In 1987, Goodman Fielder and Wattie Industries merged to become the Goodman Fielder Wattie Group, with Pat Goodman taking the helm. Pat Goodman had worked his way up from being a Nelson baker to running one of Australasia's largest companies.
Their expertise was in financial engineering, in buying and selling companies. Pat and his brother Peter were certainly experts in the bakery field.
But you know, they never really understood canning and freezing. They didn't understand consumer foods.
Therefore, they couldn't add very much, which is probably one of the reasons eventually that they sold the businesses.
The writing was soon on the wall for Goodman Fielder's involvement in the business.
Well, the first warning sign came about 18 months, 2 years before. There was a suggestion that we should sell off the frozen food business and keep the rest, because the frozen food business was the more difficult business. Now, I resisted that because I felt very strongly that you couldn't sell off the frozen food business without selling off the rights for those products to the Wattie name. And that seemed to me to be selling your crown jewels to somebody else, and you'd lose total control of it. I don't think they understood that the two things in the business that you really had were these wonderful brands and the people that made it all happen.
And this is where you come in. We can't do it without you.
Richard, he had the vision of the huge worth of the Wattie brand. Huge overview to value the brand, while at the same time the sort of courage and the insight to realise that you just had to improve all the business processes which delivered value to that brand.
We were not surprised yet, on the other hand, quite taken back when a few of us who are running these businesses, these Wattie companies, were called to Auckland.
About 200 executives from all the divisions, the Wattie Frozen, Tegel, Tip Top, various other divisions. We got into the room, about 200 of us, and Michael Nugent, who was the CEO from Australia at that stage, he announced very coldly, he said, today is a momentous day, and I'd like the following people to leave the room. And the following people were the divisions from Wattie Foods, Wattie Frozen, Tip Top, Tegel, and Best Friend, and we all went to another room. And we were suddenly confronted by a couple of people from Sydney who said, well, there's no easy way to tell you, but we're going to sell you all. And there's a bit of shocked silence for a moment, shocked that they were selling the crown jewels.
Despite the feeling of liberation from the Goodman Fielder Group, the prospect of the Wattie Group being sold off separately was not appealing.
And it was our job as the people running our businesses to really ensure that our businesses were protected against a short-term razor gang who might gut this very good firm. Directors began to be appointed for the public company. Chairmen were appointed. Pat Goodman was going to be the chairman. And for all intents and purposes, we were up for a public plate. But of course, behind that scene, there lurks the trade buyers. The two that really emerged were Pacific Dunlop and H.A. Heinz. And Heinz had, under Tony O'Reilly, had been looking at us for years. Tony had been to Hastings, and he had discussed the possibility of Heinz being a buyer back then.
Heinz was a world-renowned food company based in Pittsburgh, USA, which, like Watties, had originally been run by a family and marketed very similar products. Heinz was run by the Irishman Tony O'Reilly.
In 1973, at 36, he would be president of the company.
And at the end of the day, he paid $566 million, and he had the group.
We bought a country, in a sense, by buying the Watties brand.
Penetrating new markets, reaching new cultures.
We were now suddenly in the Heinz camp. It was like night and day.
Today, the company attitude is truly international.
He totally took us under his wing, and they displayed that care in the manner in which they then went about introducing themselves to our company. He arrived in Hastings, and the first place he went to was to Lady Wattie. It was a masterstroke. Because that becomes folklore, that's what gets talked about. Tony then immediately met growers, fruit growers and tomato growers. Where did he meet them? In the field. People hadn't been doing these things. These guys were straight in the field. Where did he go next? The Hastings factory. What did he do? He walked the factory floor. He was a British Lion, and he'd played against the All Blacks, and he could talk about the great 59.
He'd throw the ball to Pryor would go for the ball, and then our team...
And he sat with the factory staff, and he chatted to the staff, and then he spoke. And what did he say?
This is one of the best.
He's told us how good we were.
I suppose we could best characterise this as the marriage of the second best food processing company in the world with the best food processing.
Watties will be the standard bearer of New Zealand throughout the world.
So we have made the largest single ever investment by the H.J. Heinz Company in 125 years, outside the United States. We made it last night here in New Zealand.
The Watties staff were relieved to hear that Heinz had purchased the entire company and it would not be broken up. However, they never imagined the way Heinz was about to revolutionise the business.
We have always had an All Black in the family. When I married Brian, he was an All Black. We used to have a beach house up north, and I must be honest, we had lots and lots of young ones staying, and I must admit that for many times, Watties beans were the staple diet up there.
Most of the time. Nutritious, delicious, and packed with protein. We grew up with Watties in Gisborne. They lived over the back fence. Kiwis have been growing up great on the taste of Watties baked beans for generations.
And we're still propping them up.
This is Casey's restaurant in Wellington, and this is a great place to be hungry. When you come, make sure that your order includes chips, because at Casey's they do chips like no one else in town. There is one other place to get that taste and satisfaction, your place, because at your place you can now serve Watties Golden Heart fries, steak fries, crinkles, shoestrings, or super oven fries. Simply oven bake or fry. Watties means good food.
With the completion of the purchase in October 1992, Heinz was now the proud owner of the entire and intact Watties Group.
And we were now in a harbour that apparently the people would care because they would know our business.
Over the coming years, hundreds of millions of dollars were spent on further complementary acquisitions and in the creation of manufacturing centres of excellence.
New Zealand has been the beneficiary of a huge investment in state-of-the-art processing.
With this new infrastructure in place, the challenge for Watties was to expand demand to meet this new supply capability.
In my 30 years with the company, the most important thing that has occurred was the acquisition of the H.J. Heinz Company of Watties in 1992. The H.J. Heinz Company brought a more global mindset, a greater aspiration in terms of our growth. They invested significantly in terms of our capability and, very importantly, opened up access to significant export markets.
The pressure was on to justify the faith shown in them by Heinz. Watties began to look for a new generation of products and new ways to reach consumers. John MacDonald remembers one of the first strategic partnerships of the 90s.
The thing that was probably unique to New Zealand was the partnership with Plunkett. All the formulations were reworked with very natural products in them for Plunkett approved. The Plunkett partnership was an excellent vehicle for mums to be able to say, well, if Plunkett say it's good, then it's good for me.
From partnerships to products, there was a constant need to find inventive ways to bring something new to the old.
We were one of the first in the world to look at the continuation of not just whole peeled tomatoes, but Mexican tomatoes, Italian tomatoes, Indian spiced tomatoes, all of which grew that whole category. Apart from tomatoes, there were two other things that I should mention to you. One of them was Bit on the Side. There was a lot of agony about the name, even at Watties, and I was called in front of a number of people to answer for why I was about to destroy the Wattie brand with a thing called Bit on the Side. Nigel took it to Pittsburgh in part of the annual plans to sell it, and I think he was asked by Dave Williams in the middle of a board meeting, didn't he understand that this meant something different in the USA? And Nigel, to his credit, looked down the barrel of the gun and said, no, it doesn't mean anything, it's a great brand name, so take my hat off to you, Nigel.
Thank you very much. When there's no time to make my own pasta sauce, I like to use Watties.
Pasta sauce, with its high tomato content, seemed a natural fit, but sales were disappointingly slow.
Peter Lucas doesn't swear very often, but he came into my office and we were just looking at the third relaunch of pasta sauces in Carbine Road. You remember in Carbine Road we had open plan offices. And he came and he said, what are we doing about pasta sauce? And I started to go into a sort of an explanation of the glass was important and we were getting a natural product, and he cut me off at the knees. Put the things into cans, and if you can't do that, take the things off the market. As he walked out, there was a scream from the corner from Rose France and said, he can't do that. And he turned around and said to me, tell her he well can. But Pasta Sauce was born. 6 months later, we became #1 brand.
If anyone can bring you rich, tasty pasta sauce at the right price, Watties can.
A person called Mike O'Sullivan, who was managing director of Channel I, rang me and said, I'd like to come and see you. We've got a new thing that we'd like to talk to you about. It's a new idea about how to produce recipes. They were called food minutes in those days. And his idea was to sell us a month of recipes. So Watties would have a month in which you could have up to 4 recipes. They'd be put on television. Alison Gofton would produce the recipes and film them.
Add 1 can of delicious Watties Just Add devilled sausage sauce and half a cup of water.
This is really what we'd been looking for. We'd been using Alison Holst.
When Watties asked me to come up with interesting meals...
We had to explain to Alison Holst that we were using Alison Gofton. That first winter, we did recipes on lamb shanks. And I had a dozen butchers from around the country ring me to tell me, could we please be told in advance when they were going to sell lamb shanks, because there were none to be had in the country.
Among the most popular recipes, her infamous pom-pom potato pies. Watties sold 3 months' supply in just a week. And every time Alison uses tomato sauce, sales go up by about 10%.
So that seemed to be indicating that it was pretty successful. Successful it's been. Not for every product, because it doesn't suit every product, but it's certainly for the sauces, pasta sauces, simmer sauces, bit on the side. It was the making of those sauces.
The H.J. Heinz investment in Watties has been a great success for both companies.
We are now truly part of a global organisation which is one of the most respected food companies in the world.
Heinz are very pleased with their investment in Watties. The CEO of Heinz believes it's a home run.
Our chairman, president and CEO, Mr. Bill Johnson, has been there since the start. He is still extremely supportive of the Heinz Watties business, as is our current vice president for the region, Mr. Chris Warmoth. The Heinz acquisition of Watties is absolutely the main reason why the business is so successful today.
Remember when coffee was black or white instead of latte or mocha at some trendy site? A batch was a batch, not a holiday home. We used the telex, not a mobile phone. We even voted for change and called it MMP. Food departments as far as the eye could see. Used to eat Sammy's and bacon and egg pie. Now it's bok choy sushi or maybe Thai. But there's one thing to remember in the Kiwi Learner's Course is that you'll always be a Kiwi when you love our Watties sauce. Yes, you'll always be a Kiwi, forever always be a Kiwi. You'll always be a Kiwi when you love our Watties sauce. You'll always be a Kiwi, forever always be a Kiwi. You'll always be a Kiwi.
It's me. When you love our Watties sauce.
You'll always be a Kiwi, forever always be a Kiwi.
Over the following years and to the present day, Watties have continued to invent and reinvent new products to grow their market.
Whichever category we go into, the products have got to taste fantastic, be consistently healthy and progressively more and more convenient. The common mantra across the whole team is that we need to have growth. New product development is obviously designed to bring incremental value and growth to the business. But there is also a significant amount of effort putting into ensuring that our products remain, from a preference perspective, #1.
Part of remaining at #1 involves a clear understanding of the consumer.
The big change these days is that we are trying to move away from talking to consumers to having a dialogue with consumers. With our Food in a Minute program, we're having a dialogue with those consumers, over 100,000 consumers who we email weekly with recipes, and they come back to us and ask us questions about the products, the recipes. They provide tips, they share their recipe books online with other Food in a Minute devotees.
This communication is key to staying abreast of consumer trends and worldwide developments, and two of the hot topics in food production at the moment are organics and sustainability.
Consumers are reading, we've got the internet, they read and they want to know every single ingredient in our foods, where they're from, and that's a good thing. One side of that's the need for organic foods and to give organic options.
Watties have become a market leader in these worldwide movements and have been in organics since 1999 with Kowhai Farms.
The big benefit of that was not just the produce that you got from your organic farmers, but the lessons that were learnt that were shared with other growers, so that there were opportunities to reduce sprays, to take special care of the soil.
Yeah, it was important that it was a commercial farm to Heinz, because we wanted to be able to demonstrate to other grower suppliers that this was a system they could copy and adopt. So it had to be something that was translatable to them in terms of the scale, in terms of the operations, in terms of the economics.
Sustainability has always been important to the company since the early days of Jim Wattie.
I see Watties as having a running start in terms of that.
The efforts the company's going to reduce our carbon footprint are very comprehensive. Where we've started is in the crop supply area, improving crop yields, crop performance, so that we actually use less land, less water, less fertiliser. Here in New Zealand we get the highest average yields of anywhere in the world. Peas working well with the crop growing cycle in New Zealand, and the climate is very conducive. So that gives both us and the growers a natural competitive advantage.
We are always looking for opportunities to reduce our carbon footprint. We're looking for energy saving opportunities, have goals by department, so each department is focused on improving that use, but also things like waste. It's probably a big one for us in the packaging area, minimising the use of resource, so minimising our waste around cartons, cardboard use, poly use.
This is really good for New Zealand because it helps bring other people along. As a significant exporter, we've got to show the world that we have a leadership position in that.
With its keen interest in sustainability, Watties will reap benefits for years to come. So what does the future hold for Watties?
The Watties brand is an extraordinarily strong place. It is the most loved brand in New Zealand. It is the biggest grocery brand in New Zealand. It, by any measure, is part of the very fabric of New Zealand life and community. Holding true to our values, holding true to what has made us great for the first 75 years will put us in great stead for the next 75 years and beyond.
The last 75 years have seen Watties and New Zealand's fortunes closely intertwined.
It is impossible to exaggerate the influence of the Wattie business on the Hawke's Bay, on New Zealand, or indeed on the daily life of every New Zealander. Watties has been seen as the food supplier to the nation.
Today, Watties is the most respected and the largest food brand in New Zealand supermarkets, and loved by Kiwis throughout the land.
I think I've got to be the only Prime Minister in the world that could be a living sort of marketing manager for your company. Half time I end up in my office eating dinner on my own, working through a whole bunch of paperwork and things I do, and I've taken to eating baked beans out of a can. I might add, Heinz Wattie baked beans out of a can.
Arising from the desperate times of the 1930s Great Depression, Watties and New Zealand experienced great ups and downs over the next 7 decades.
It's not the strongest that survive, it's those that are the most adaptable to change.
Definitely a culture where they allow people to be innovative.
The opportunities are only limited to your imagination, that if you've got an idea or a concept, anything is possible. If you put the work in, you can achieve whatever result you desire.
Any suggestions for improvements and cost and savings you can make, they're all they listen really well to things like that.
You are encouraged to make your own decisions and go for it within the rules you're allowed to play.
Through it all, Watties has overcome all of the obstacles in its path, thanks to the committed group of people who make up this famous New Zealand company.
At Heinz Watties, we believe that good times and bad times will come and go, but that good people are always good people and that they will make the best of times regardless. The current Watties team have spent the vast majority of their careers being part of the H.J. Heinz family.
But Watties has many long-serving employees.
25 years.
25 years again.
Started with Watties in 1970 in the can-making plant.
I started working with Watties in 1990. They offered me 3 days' work.
Just over 28 years.
35 years.
I've had aunties, uncles, cousins. My mother worked here for a short while, so yeah, it's a bit of a family history here.
There's a lot of people here that have done a lot of years service, so they are friends for life, a lot of people.
You know, we've got a good mix here at Watties of youth and experience, and you know, I think there are differences of people, but they all share the same goal, which is, you know, to make Watties a huge success.
All heading in the same direction and passionate about their roles and have a good can-do attitude, so creates a healthy environment all the way through.
People working at Watties, there's a great family atmosphere.
There is a real sense of pride in working for Heinz Watties.
It's reasonably easy to have that pride when you work for Watties, the most loved brand in the country.
We are all proud to work here at Watties.
Proud and strong.
We grew up with Watties, it's part of our life. Great brands, great products, great people.
It has grown and developed into the preeminent brand in the New Zealand grocery market.
A key to our success has been the quality of the products that we offer, both in our domestic market and internationally, the innovation we bring, and also our market-leading brands. Another key to our success, I believe, has been the genuine desire of our team to add value at the interface we have across our customer base.
The Foodstuffs and Watties relationship is a hugely important one to both Foodstuffs and Watties. It goes back many, many years. It's based on a mutual enjoyment of each other's company and doing business. Their values are similar, and I know the relationship that Watties have, but at all parts of the Foodstuffs organisation, from stores right through to the central offices, is a very, very firm one. And they just form a bond that no other supplier that I know of can match in the industry.
Heinz Watties is a truly successful New Zealand story. We have a very proud and successful history. We will continue to be passionate about delivery of products to both our domestic and our international consumers. With the current team, with the capability they have, their commitment and their can-do attitude, I'm extremely confident that we'll continue to have success in the future.
You can talk out through your nose and say, "How you going, mate?" You can shout your cuzzies lunch, but just make sure they bring a plate. You can watch the one-day cricket, you can scream until you're hoarse, but you'll never be a Kiwi till you love our Watties sauce. You can burn a snarl of black white through, slap it on some bread. You can throw the kids a bowl of chips and say that they've been fed. You can wear your sloppy jandals on a very posh golf course, but you'll never be a Kiwi till you love our Watties sauce. You can do a fearsome haka, every All Black can with ease. You can bake a cake that lights the skies and serve it up for tea. Well, you can sit and yarn the night away if the beer will last, of course, but you'll never be a Kiwi till you love our Watties sauce.